This is called an end wall, where we are right here. The door to the end wall is really important to think about. So this one's a sliding door. It's pretty small though. So if you've got larger equipment, you can get a walk behind BCS rototiller in here, but just barely, right? So thinking about the size of your equipment, what you need to get in and out, and maneuverability, that's really important. And then the sidewalls. So they roll up and down. So somebody's got to be around, unless you figure out a way to get them automated, which that is a thing. Someone's got to be around to roll the sidewalls up when it's hot and roll the sidewalls down when it gets cold. So currently we have flowers in here, and our rule of thumb is at about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, we roll them down at night. And then, as you notice, it gets real steamy and hot in there as soon as the sun comes back out. So then you got to roll the sidewalls up. So benefits of having a high tunnel, right? So why would you want to do season extension is you can usually get higher quality produce. You don't have that weathering, the rain, the wind, right? You have some protection from the elements. So then, because you have higher quality produce, you can usually ask a higher price, right? So you're that person at the market with the nice looking tomatoes or the nice looking peppers, that kind of thing. You can ask for a higher price because you're out of that normal window that other people have everything, right? The field growers have it. So, if you have tomatoes in early June, you can ask for a higher price. Other things, so this is passively heated and cooled, so it relies on wind to cool things down. So you'd raise the sidewalls up if you want to cool things down, and the sun heats things up. So there's no heat in here. There are growers with modified high tunnels that add heat or add fans. That is not necessary. It can be helpful if you really want to get going early or that kind of thing, but it's not necessary.
So what's the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse? I mean, they look pretty much the same. What about water sources? We just said that
usually a greenhouse is not passively heated and cooled. There is a cooling system, there is a heating system, right? There's temperature controls. You're not necessarily raising and lowering the sides to get that temperature modification, right? And you have a lot more control over your environment in there. A tunnel is, you get what you get, right? So you can raise the sides and it's still going to be hot in there in July, and so that's just how it works. So there are some differences there. And typically when people say, I've got somebody growing in a greenhouse, I envision, and the understanding is that it's soilless media, right? You're using potting soil, and that there is a modified environment in there as far as heating and cooling.
Well, you're talking about temperature control in June and July. I mean, the sides are open. We got what we got. What about if we wanted to grow crops in the fall or early spring? I mean, it could be 40 degrees outside in February. Do we need to be concerned about temperature at that point in time?
You do, to a certain extent. If the sun's out in February, it could easily be 20 degrees warmer in the tunnel. If you've got it all shut up and nicely, sealed, the cracks and crevices are, nicely sealed, it'll easily be 20 degrees warmer in the tunnel with the sun out. And you don't have that wind factor because the sidewalls are down, right? But the other thing that you can do is add row cover. And so when it gets to be, freezing in here, when the temperatures outside get to be freezing, we will put on row cover at night. So that's another task you have to do late in the afternoon, evening, and then take it off in the morning because it'll get really warm in here. And it also gets very humid. So you can see condensation on the inside there. So row cover is still usually needed when we get into November, December, January, February, if you don't have a heating unit of some sort.
All right, well, what about crops? I know we're growing flowers in here. Can I grow anything in a high tunnel?
You can. Now, the question you need to ask is, should you, right? So this is high value real estate. So do you need to grow pumpkins in here when you can grow them successfully outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's questions I get from a lot of people is, well, I want to put pumpkins in here. Well, pumpkins don't need to be ready until mid-September, right? So you can successfully grow them outside. You don't need to get an early season jump, right? Nobody's
Mm-hmm.
going to buy pumpkins before September, usually not. And so thinking about what's the best use of this tunnel. Growing up and trellising, that's a good use of this tunnel, right? So using all of the space in the tunnel is usually the best use of it. So we're talking tomatoes, things that grow up. A lot of vining crops, they still would not grow really well if you planted watermelons in March, for example, in a high tunnel. They're probably still going to be pretty slow to get going, even if you had row cover, even if you had all that stuff. So thinking about that kind of stuff. Sweet corn. I've had people ask about sweet corn, growing sweet corn in a tunnel. Well, yes. Again, you can grow anything in a high tunnel, but is it the best use of the space, right? Those are things you need to ask yourself. And have you been successful growing it outside? Is there a reason to move it into the tunnel, right?
Okay.
So what we notice with tomatoes especially is we get higher quality produce, higher quality fruit, tomato fruit, when we grow in a tunnel, because there's that protection from the weather that usually damages a tomato, right? They've got really sensitive skin, so we need to protect them. Sweet corn, for example, it's got the husk, right? It's protected. So from that standpoint, it's not nearly as helpful. You're still gonna, possibly struggle with corn earworm, so that's not gonna change things, right? So thinking about that kind of stuff. But yes, short answer.
That'll work. Well, do you got a top 10er? What crops would be suitable for a high tunnel?
Research has shown that tomatoes per square foot, the tomato is the highest value crop that you can grow in a tunnel. Cucumbers also, so thinking about trellising, you can grow up. Cucumbers, that's also a high value crop. Lettuce, so in the winter, right? So we can't make as much use of the trellising factor. There's not a lot of, you still need a relatively cold hardy crop to grow in the tunnel during that time. So usually it's lettuce and kale, greens. You can get a pretty high value from those kind of vegetables in the winter, and they still do well. We have a light factor in the tunnel, right, in the winter. That is usually our limiting factor in some cases. So growing lettuce and greens are a really good option. Flowers. So this project is evaluating fall grown flowers. So you could grow these flowers in the spring, but a lot of people want to grow tomatoes. So what can we get from flowers? What kind of harvest, what kind of money could someone potentially make growing flowers this time of year? And can they be successful? So those are things we're looking at here. So thinking about what you're going to sell something for, and is it the best use of the tunnel space? That's ultimately what people need to, evaluate their own market, their own price point for things, and then say, okay. Or if you're seeing a lot of environmental damage out in the field with things, okay, if moving it into the tunnel, will that change things for me? Yeah.
All right. Well, like you said, Doc, this is high dollar real estate, and there's not much of it there. Do you see a benefit of multi-crops or just a single crop in that?
Certainly, it is hard. I understand there. The inclination for growers to not rotate, right? Because there's a few really high value crops. But rotation is really important to managing disease and pest pressure over the long term. So we talked about, or before we got on camera, we talked about that high tunnel honeymoon period, right? Where everything seems beautiful and easy, and that lasts for a couple years. And then you got to get real, right? So, so rotating and really managing your fertilizer and not putting too much down, just being very conservative with, and really watching things, soil testing annually at least. That's going to be important, and certainly crop rotation is part of that management strategy. So you grow tomatoes in here 5 years in a row and nothing else. It is not a matter of if you're going to see disease. It's a matter of when you're going to see disease, right?
That's right. So we're just going to see a different set of problems. It's not different. A perfect situation.
No, there is no perfect situation in farming. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
I know,
just
right?
The elite get to play in it.
Exactly. Yes, the gamblers, the risk takers, they're also the farmers here. So the people that are willing to roll the dice a little bit. So yes, different set of problems than in the field. So we see different pest pressure, we see different disease. For example, sclerotinia, we see a lot more sclerotinia, timber rot, it's also called timber rot for tomatoes. We see a lot more of that in the tunnels than we do in the open field, because it's you've got tomatoes in here in March, right? And sclerotinia likes that cool, damp weather, right? You're not going to plant tomatoes outside in March. So you've kind of missed that window where it potentially could be a problem out in the open field, but it's ripe and perfect in the high tunnel. So that's just an example. And we ourselves have seen timber rot out here, even with, in the first couple of years of using these tunnels. So our honeymoon period didn't last that long, unfortunately.
Well, let's back up and you mentioned soil sampling, soil testing, and do it yearly.
Yes.
Is there anything special we need to look for in a soil test, or can a routine soil test do it before? Like if we're planning to do a high tunnel, should we test before that?
Yes.
Do I need to be concerned about anything else other than a routine soil test?
Yeah, great question. So I would recommend people soil tests in September, October. That way they can plan for their next big spring crop. But even before the tunnels go up, yes, collect a soil sample and look at the initial sample can probably just be a routine soil sample. So you'd be looking at soil pH, right? Okay, is it way high or is it way low, right? Be familiar with what the overall pH, soil pH should be for most vegetable crops, which is around a 6.5, right? So certainly you can there's some wiggle room there, but 6.5 will cover most vegetable crops. The phosphorus and potassium and magnesium values, that's going to be important, because those will, especially potassium and magnesium, those will fluctuate a lot in a tunnel. And so kind of taking stock of that. Once the tunnel's up and you're growing in the tunnel, a soluble salts test is recommended, and to monitor that every year. So add that on to, that is not part of your standard soil test, but adding that on, monitoring that, because we don't have weathering, we don't have the rain coming in and the snow coming in and kind of leaching excess nutrients out, we get buildup. And so when people add a lot of fertilizer, if a little is good, then a lot is going to be great, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Not necessarily the case. And so if the plants don't take it up, it's sitting there. And so that's something people need to be mindful of, is without that natural weathering, leaching process, we can potentially have salt buildup. And that happens with conventional synthetic fertilizers like calcium nitrate. It also happens with manure-based compost, right? There's salt in manure, and then you apply it to this basically closed system, and it can stay there. It can hang out there for a while if it's not taken up by the plant.
All right. Well, we've done our due diligence. We've pulled our soil sample from a couple of different places that we're thinking about. What's some other things that we need to have in the back of our mind as a new grower as far as placement of a high tunnel?
Oh, good questions. Okay, so people look at the drainage. So if you just bought a piece of property and you want to immediately put a tunnel on there, I would say hold off wait a season, wait a year, observe where, you know, does water pool? Does it immediately drain when we have, you know, the kind of rain we had a couple days ago up here, you know, almost monsoonal rain? Where does it go, right? It may look like, oh, this is a nice flat spot, we should put a tunnel here. But maybe there's something going on underneath that, you know, a couple, you know, rough months of winter will kind of reveal that to you, right? Is it just soggy here all the time? That is not a good place for a high tunnel, right? So well-draining soil, soil that's not rocky, right? Not big rocks, right? Flat is important, flat ground is important, but, and you can see here, and we can show you I'll show you another example of what is ideal. So building the tunnel up slightly above the ground around it, so things drain away from the tunnel. So a lot of water comes off this roof, even this little roof, a lot of water can come off when it rains. And what happens is it just kind of hits the ground and hopefully it drains, but sometimes in certain circumstances, we don't have too much trouble with it here, but what I've seen is it works its way under the tunnel, and then inside the crop is wet and soggy and is sitting in basically mud for an extended period of time. That's what we don't want. So it doesn't, in a lot of cases, it doesn't, you know, run off the roof and just go away. No, it kind of sits on the soil and then it wicks underneath and it causes a problem inside the tunnel, which people don't. Right, you think it's not an umbrella, right? Yeah, it doesn't work like that, right? So we got it can wick and cause problems for the crops in the tunnel. So building up the soil that the tunnel is going to sit on and having kind of it slope away is the best option. And we can we have bigger tunnels here that do a really nice demonstration of that. That's like the ideal situation. So, what else?
What about water sources? We just said that we're trying to drain everything. We can't get it in there. We probably need a water source that's going to be pretty handy and convenient for us.
Yes.
In the placement of these.
So, you know, there are the rain catchment systems, and those can be super handy and also environmentally conscientious, right? Taking advantage of all that rain I mentioned coming off those roofs. But if it doesn't rain for 2 weeks, you're probably going to be out of rainwater. So having a source relatively nearby, some sort of hydrant, or you know, even a well. But if you have a well, you need a pump, right? Those are important. So we've got, for these 2 tunnels, we've got a hydrant that's, I don't know, 50 feet away, and that, you know, we can run drip tape, lay flat, all that stuff from there to these tunnels. So it doesn't have to be right next to the tunnel, but it should be accessible, right?
And we're not talking a lot of high pressure system here. We're pretty low pressure. We can do, like you said, with a couple of tanks and filling up.
So for example, for rainwater, especially for a tunnel this short, so the longer your beds are, that's where you get into the pressure issue. So we talk about irrigated feet, right? Mm-hmm. So the amount of drip tape you've got running combined with the length of that drip tape, that all adds up to affecting your pressure. The amount of bends in your, you know, if you've got a elbow here and an elbow here and you're bending around things to try to, every bend is going to affect your pressure. So keeping things nice and simple and straight from the hydrant or from your well, that's going to help your pressure. But you really only need a couple PSI, PSI to run something like this. That would be ultra low pressure drip. So that means you're going to need to run it for longer, right? But it is possible.
Okay.
And I have a video that I can send you all that kind of talks about that ultra low pressure system.
All right. Well, we can definitely put that in the chat if you give us the link.
Yeah.
What about designs? Are all high tunnels the same design, or? Is there different options out there?
Yes, there are different options. So this is a Gothic, and that is what we recommend for Kentucky growers because we're kind of in this weird, we're not really Southern, we're not really Midwestern. We get kind of a little bit of both from the weather. So we get those snows, right? And so the Gothic, this peak, is really important to shed rain, to shed snow. That's really, really important. There's the Quonset style, which is the rounded, and a lot of people have that, but you run the risk of having some if we get a hard snow, right? You got to get out there with the broom and, you know, knock the snow off. These are the bows. The spacing on the bows is really important. So these are about 4 feet apart. Anything wider than that is not recommended for Kentucky because of the snow, the potential snow load. This makes a nice sturdy tunnel. 4 to 4 feet apart, that makes a nice sturdy tunnel. The further this bow is from the other bow, right, we're gonna have more space, more potential for sagging. See, this is a pretty nice, tight plastic. These are, you know, manually rolled up sidewalls. What I like about these is they go up really, you know, nice and high. So almost 5 feet. So that's pretty nice. I'm about 5'7". So they're taller than me, or almost as tall as me. And so that adds a lot. Things can cool down. You get a nice breeze. That's great. Not all sidewalls are created equal. And so when you're contracting to build your tunnel, that's a question you need to ask. Okay, can I have 5-6 foot high sidewalls? You know, sometimes I'll see tunnels where the sidewalls only go up this high. That is not going to help with cooling things down. It's also going to like be kind of a pain to maneuver in there. You know, you can see things are hanging out the side. If you've got a nice short sidewall, then that means this piece comes down here, so you've got more of a curve. And so it's just hard to walk around. Normally what I say for height is it's based off of your needs, right? So these aren't very tall. I don't know, 10 feet tall maybe.
10, 11 feet tall?
Yeah,
Sure.
Not very tall. We don't use big equipment in here. We've got some taller high tunnels. We can get a tractor in there, you know? So it really depends on the amount, your equipment. If you've got big stuff, then yeah, you need to take that into consideration, right? If you want to use a tractor in your tunnel, then yeah, you're going to need a wide tunnel, you're going to need a wide end wall, and you're going to need to make sure that you have clearance.
All right, what about life expectancy? Like we said earlier, that's a high dollar tool on our farm here. What kind of life expectancy can we expect out of it?
So most of the tunnels that I see are made out of metal, so steel. Most that's going to have a pretty long life. The structure itself will be okay. The doors, the end walls, the side walls, that stuff will probably need to be replaced. The plastic on this is 6 mil poly. That usually has about a 5-year life expectancy, depending on how well it's put on. So we're on year 2 now on this stuff, and it still looks pretty good. So the structure itself should be fine for years and years to come. But you know, if there's anything wood, you can see our door is made of wood, right? We're gonna have to change this at some point, right? Even treated lumber will need to be replaced at some point. The kickboards, that's wood. So those kind of things, those will have to be replaced.
What about setup? Is this something the average farmer can do, or do we need to look and try to find some expert help?
I guess, you know, it's like anything, right? It depends on your mechanical skills, right? I'm gonna call a plumber, right, for my stuff at home, right? I'm not gonna try to fix it myself. I'm not super mechanically inclined, but some people are. And this is not a terribly, you have built this, right? Mm-hmm. It's not terribly difficult. it takes, you know, it's nice to have a few hands, right? It's easy-ish with 5 to 10 people, right?
Right.
And someone directing traffic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we got this up in what? It was 2 days.
2 days.
2 days, less than 2 days, right? 2 fairly easy days. But that was with someone with a lot of knowledge and experience, kind of showing us how to do things. So it's a lot of it is some geometry, right? Getting it set up. There's some geometry involved. Grow Appalachia has some really good videos that can kind of walk people through how to set them up. A lot of people just, because of the EQIP, the NRCS EQIP program, a lot of people do just have someone else do it. But this is totally doable to do on your own if you are, you know, familiar with construction.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. All right, Doc, I know we mentioned flowers earlier, and to be honest with you, I'm a little bit lost in this world. What do we got going on? What kind of crops? What kind of equipment do we need to do this?
Yes. So, yes, I'm the vegetable specialist, but as I said earlier, we're looking at rotations. So all these are in a different family from what your common vegetable crops would be. So, you know, rotating into a non-host or a different family is a great way to try to break that pest and disease cycle. So we're evaluating fall-grown cut flowers. So we've got, these are cosmos, we've got sunflowers, we've got, you can see them down there, we've got amaranth. So yes, amaranth / pigweed, but this is ornamental, fancy pigweed, if you will, zinnias, and strawflower. So these are relatively short days to maturity, which is why they were chosen, because fall, right, we're getting into that less sunlight, cooler temps, that kind of thing, and so you're a little bit more constrained in what you can grow. So these sunflowers here in the middle, they were planted in 1 week increments. So we've got a chunk was planted in, you know, mid-August, then a week later another chunk was planted, and then a week after that another chunk. So the strategy there is that you can stagger your harvest and, you know, have more for a longer period of time. And everything was transplanted except the sunflowers; those were direct seeded. This netting, this is called Hort Nova netting. It looks like a volleyball net, right? You can turn it up this way and use it for trellising for other things like cucumbers. That's where I've commonly seen it. So you turn it this way with some T-posts or some rebar, and the cucumbers can kind of grow through it, going up. This helps keep the stems nice and straight. So for flowers, straight stems, that's really important from a marketing standpoint. You don't want things really crooked. You know, they're some of these are a little bit delicate, so it also just kind of stabilizes things if the wind kind of comes through. And then we've got, you know, we kind of mix and match. We've got the real sturdy T-posts, and then we've got some like thinner rebar. And it's kind of up to people what they've got. We've just got stuff around, so we kind of make do with what we have. These sticky cards. So I see these in tunnels a lot. But what I don't see is people taking them out and putting fresh ones in. So the sticky cards are meant to be as a scouting tool, right? So we're looking for thrips, aphids, right? And we look at them every week, and then we put new ones in, right? So then we can see, okay, if we apply a pesticide, did it work? Are we still having pest pressure, right? There's part of that to it. You also need to scout, right? Turn leaves over, look for damage, that kind of thing. So the different colors. So the blue mostly attracts thrips. Yellow attracts pretty much anything else. So that's the difference that's the reason for the 2 different cards. You can do, again, we're making do with what we have. This is a great little tool. You just glue 2 safety pins together, or clothespins, and then you've got a clip, right, for your sticky cards. So 1 clips to the T-post, 1 clips to the sticky card. And so, yeah, we pull those every week. We look at them, and then we kind of make a decision on, okay, do we need to spray? Because there is very little room for any kind of damage for flowers. They basically need to be perfect, especially if people are going to sell them to a florist, right? If you're going to do kind of a wholesale strategy, there is very little room for error there. So, and then, so row spacing. So when we had tomatoes in here, we had about 2 foot space with 3 rows of tomatoes, basically kind of what you see here, but they were 2 feet wide. So there was a lot more walking room. With the flowers, we've got 3 foot spacing with like a 1 foot walkway. And it gets a little, you know, it's kind of a booby trap kind of situation in here. So another great thing for these tall sidewalls is you can get in from the side if you need to, or you can spray into the tunnel, right? Because I had the backpack sprayer on yesterday and it's just really hard to maneuver. And so getting in here and spraying, it's kind of can be a little challenging with all these posts.
So what about fertilization and water? Do I just come in here with a watering can, put a little Miracle Grow in it, and sprinkle over the top and call it good?
No, please don't. So we talked about soil sampling. The soil sample has a purpose, right? So you're going to look at that with your county agent, or maybe I'll get pulled in, right? And you're going to say, okay, what does our crop need? What are we currently working with based off the soil sample? And, you know, what kind of changes do we need to make? So it's not just, hey, I took a soil sample.
Step one, good
deal. Step one, I never need to look at it again. No, it actually has a purpose. So knowing what you need, knowing what your crop is going to need, and you know, shifting or, you know, adjusting based off what that soil test indicates, right? So for flowers and for vegetable crops, we do not recommend overhead irrigation. That is not something, you know, that is a recipe for disease. It's also just not water efficient, right? So we've got lay flat here. This is going to be basically kind of your main line, what we call a main line. Plugged into the lay flat, we punch holes into this lay flat, and this is kind of a woven rubber kind of material, and this can be reused. After that, then we've got these valves that then attach to the drip tape. So drip tape has these tiny little holes in it that releases the water. So you turn the water on and the water just drips slowly out. So it goes directly to the soil, directly to plant roots. That is where plants most efficiently take up water. This hose kind of, when you pull it off the roll, it kind of has a crease on it, or it does have a crease on it. And that is where you want to put the hole, is right on this crease. It's a natural crease. You'll know exactly what it is when you see it. So you don't want to put the valve here or here. You want to put it right on that crease so that when this inflates, right, everything's straight, everything's pointing one way, right? And you can lay it flat. That's what's called lay flat, right? The amount of lines is kind of up to each person. I would say, you know, the water wicks, when you turn on the water and you have drip tape, the water wicks, you know, depending on how long you have it on, probably a foot. So a 6-inch radius out from the drip tape. So then you're going to base how many lines of drip tape you need based on how many lines of crop you have. So for our tomato crop, we had one line of drip tape, no problem, right next to the plants. With this, we have 4 rows of flowers. So we have 3 lines of drip tape. It's 3 feet. So, right, we've got some overlap there, and there's plenty of water.
All right, Doc. We've covered most of the benefits and disadvantages of high tunnels. What's one more thing we got to worry about? Specifically weed control. You got any good suggestions on that?
Yeah, so weed management can be a real challenge, and again, you wouldn't necessarily think so because you're in this structure, but it can get out of control. And so this woven weed mat is a really handy thing to use. You can reuse it year after year. The stuff on the outside, we put stuff along the outside to facilitate easier mowing. We don't have to weed eat right up on the tunnel, right? And then when you weed eat, you inevitably get weeds in the tunnel, right? It sprays back into the tunnel. So we have weed mat about a foot out from the tunnel. We also have it coming up on these sideboards, right, a little bit, right? So to just facilitate that a little better, to keep that protected. It also keeps it a little warmer. So on that tunnel, we put it over top as we were building the tunnel. So that weed mat's there for as long as the tunnel's there. We're not moving that. So there's a few different strategies. Inside, we have weed mat as well. And that is just to take, so it is a little extra effort up front to burn the holes where the transplants go and that kind of thing, but it just makes it so much easier during the season. You don't have time to weed, you know. There's a few weeds, but it's generally a lot more manageable. And so you can pull the weed mat, you put it down with staples, big staples, and you can pull it up and change it out, different spacings, right? So from tomatoes to flowers, we changed the weed mat out, and we just rolled it up. We cleaned it, we rolled it up, and stored it for next year.
You put a little label on it so you didn't forget what crop.
Yes, exactly. Because otherwise, you're going to be shifting through all your stuff, wondering what was this? Yeah, where did this go? So yes, label it. Be sure to clean it when you pull it up. You can lay it out, and if you've got a rain coming, let it wash off. There's some sanitation that could happen. Give it a good scrub, maybe dunk it in, some 10% bleach solution in a big, tub, something like that, and pack it away. Let it dry and pack it away. In Kentucky, high tunnels are considered greenhouses. So from a pesticide application standpoint, that's something to really pay attention to. So if it says permitted for use in a greenhouse, in Kentucky, that means it's permitted for use in a greenhouse or in a high tunnel. And so there are no herbicides that are permitted for use in high tunnels in Kentucky. So you're either mechanically weeding, or you've got this preventative barrier basically, or you're not. You've got weeds. There's very little to work with here.
Now, on the outside here, you mentioned a very nasty word, weed eating. I hate that job. That is the worst job in the world.
I am okay with it.
What about if I want to grab a little Roundup and just spray down there? I won't have any weeds that way.
Correct. You may not also have any vegetables growing in your tunnel. So if you are, and I've seen this happen, right? If you are just absolutely bent on applying herbicide somewhere, you just need to do it. You could do it on the outside, but you are taking a risk that herbicide is going to drift into your high tunnel, even if you have the sides rolled down, right? Let's say you roll these sides down and you're being real careful. You run that risk. And then if the herbicide has drifted onto your crop, onto your vegetable crop, well, you have now made an illegal application of herbicide on your crop, and therefore it is not commercially viable anymore. So be aware, there are risks. There are a lot of people that have gravel next to their tunnel, which is also a great option, but weeds come up, and then usually they are tempted to use herbicide, right? And then we run that whole risk, that scenario that I just described.
All right, Doc. As part of the kit for being in the Farm School for Women, they're going to get some materials to do a low tunnel. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the different parts of a low tunnel and just kind of a quick setup real quick.
Okay. So here's hoops, right? It doesn't really look like a hoop. The hoops come in different shapes, sizes, thicknesses. These are pretty simple and cheap wire hoops. They go in Just pretty easy. You can determine how high or how low they're going to be. So, right. So this one I put into the ground pretty low. This one not as much, right? So that would depend on the height of your crop. So you can already tell, right, that there's going to be some limiting factors here, right? This isn't going to work for full-grown tomato, right? So people just need to keep that in mind. So the crop would go under here, so you'd have the bed of the crop, and then you just put the hoop right around it, and then the row cover gets pulled over. So there are all kinds of dimensions for row cover. There's the pretty narrow row cover that would just basically fit over one bed of a crop, so maybe 3-4 feet wide. And then there's the blanket we have some that fit this entire tunnel. That's just one giant blanket that would go over everything together, and we'll see a photo of that. We'll see a demo of that in a little bit. And then there's these square ones. So same principle. You can lock something into here so it doesn't blow as much. You typically don't want the row cover to blow around a lot. You want to hold it down. We have a bunch of rock bags, so the row cover is going to be here, and then we plop rock bags about every 6 feet just to keep the wind from blowing it. And again, you're going to put it on depending on your crop and when it's most tolerant to different temperatures. You're going to put row cover on and then have to take it off when the sun's out.
And how far apart do I need to put the hoops?
I like them a little bit close together. I don't like saggy row cover. So I would say it depends on your crop, but I'd say about 6 feet. 5 feet, something like that. So then you can get the row cover nice and tight. So the tighter the row cover is, the easier it is to take it off. If it's like saggy and there's just a lot of material, it's going to be really hard to take off. It's also a lot easier with two people to put row cover on and off. You can do it like a big blanket, right? One person gets one end and the other person gets the other end, and you just move together and either take it off or put it back on. When it's saggy, it might drag across the plants, and that's what we don't want. You don't want to damage your crop. If it gets saggy in the middle of the night and then you have a freeze, it can freeze to the leaves of the crop, which you also don't want. So you want it nice and tight. You don't want it sagging. There are people that don't even use the hoops. They just put the row cover on. And I think that depends on your crop and kind of what you're growing and what the temperatures are and your management strategy, right? So not everybody uses hoops. But they are quite handy as far as moving row cover on and off.
Well, that sounds like a whole lot of work. What's the benefits as a grower that I'm getting from these?
Season extension. You're getting that extra protection. So there's different thicknesses of row cover. So there's even row cover that's basically just for pest exclusion. So if you're an organic grower or you don't want to spray as many pesticides, you can use a very thin row cover that still allows a lot of light penetration, that basically is there all the time. You never take it off, and it keeps the pests out. Now you got to make sure the pests weren't there to begin with, right? Otherwise you're just trapping them in there with a buffet. But that's one method. And then there's various levels of thicknesses, which typically the price goes up as the thickness increases, right? But there's some that basically don't allow any light, and it is genuinely like a blanket. And you can survive, you can basically make a plant survive very low temperatures without any cold damage, which is, of course, what you're going for if you're a commercial grower. So, in the 20s easily, especially in a high tunnel. If you've got the high tunnel and a little mini low tunnel or row cover situation inside, you can get through the winter here, for sure.
Right. Well, what about, you mentioned the different thicknesses and stuff like that. What about different materials? Can we use something like a heavy piece of plastic that we got laying around?
You can't. So the plastic from high tunnel, right? There's a lot of leftover 6 mil polyethylene plastic lying around. You can use that. That would be more of a permanent kind of structure where I would be less inclined to take that off and remove it. I would maybe build a more permanent low tunnel where it's basically like a tiny high tunnel, and that's what I view when we're using plastic. Otherwise, it's more of a cloth, probably polyester, kind of woven fabric.
Something like the old tobacco cotton that
Yes.
farmers
Yeah.
used to use.
Yes, exactly. And we'll see that over when you go over there. But yeah, good question. The plastic, the polyethylene coverings, that is totally something someone could do, but I would be less inclined to have that be taken on and off every day. It's possible, but I think you need to set up, I think, some maybe more structurally sound hoops to make that possible, because it might get torn or, scratched up a lot.
Okay, Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about these low tunnels? It looks like you have some covering on them.
Yes, so this is the covering I was talking about earlier. This is the thin, this is just pest exclusion. In fact, you can see some little bugs right on here. So this is thin, this allows for light penetration. We've got a very cold hardy crop here. This is Brussels sprouts, so this is not for cold protection purposes in this instance, because you can see there's light penetration. They've got hoops in here, you can kind of see them there, just providing some structure, just so the row cover's not sagging completely on this crop. So this one stays on all the time. Okay. They've also got these bags of sand, bags of rocks throughout, staggered throughout here to keep it on for, when the wind comes up and stuff. And also to keep the pests out.
So you have thicker types. Now, the thicker types that are more for like frost protection, whenever it gets warm, do you have to take them on and off? How does that work?
So in a field situation, a lot of times people won't. So there are various thicknesses and various amounts of light penetration with those thicknesses. So the thickest one, like a 1.5, I think it's 1.5 ounce per yard or something like that. I can't remember the units exactly off the top of my head. That's basically almost no light penetration. So that one I would be inclined to, either you've got a crop that you're just trying to get through the winter, right? So you're not going to be harvesting too much, or maybe not at all, and you just want it to survive the winter. So, come late February, you can harvest, or that kind of thing. Or you can have the type that allows for a certain amount of light penetration, that stays on more often. Or you can have the take on, put on, take off kind of situation. So in the tunnel, because it gets so much warmer in the tunnel, we are normally a take off, put on every day or as needed, right? If the sun's out, the row cover comes off, usually. Because it can get really humid in there too. So you've got your own little microclimate, and it can get really humid. And so there's a few different strategies depending on the crop you're growing, honestly. And so when to take it off or put it on, that again depends on your crop. So Brussels sprouts are super cold hardy. You may not, a thin layer that's allows for a certain amount of light penetration, that may be all you need for the whole winter. For lettuce and things like that, that would be, I don't want it to get too hot. So, once the tunnel gets into the 60s, that row cover's got to come off, right? I don't want it to get too hot in there. And I also don't want a lot of wet leaves from that humidity building up under there. So that condensation. So, it really depends on the crop. Like with the flowers, we'll be putting, when it gets into the 45 range, we'll put row cover on those flowers. And so, yeah, they'll have to come on, take it off, put it on. It's a whole thing.
So do you have to, based upon the thickness, if it's a little bit thicker, do you have to have a watering system down if it's outdoors, or will it allow for water to penetrate through?
It will, like this kind of thing would allow rain, but with any vegetable crop, almost any vegetable crop, I would say drip irrigation should be what you're using. And so with the exception of very few vegetable crops, would I say you should just rely on rain. So yes, there is drip irrigation in here. You just can't see it. But I would run the drip irrigation. It might surprise you in the winter how much water you need. It may be, people would probably assume that you need a lot less water, but because you can get a lot of heat buildup under there, you still need to irrigate. So, and especially in a tunnel.
Right.
Yeah. If you've got snow melt and rain, maybe not, but in a tunnel for sure, you're still going to need to irrigate.
But these row covers are definitely beneficial, especially outdoors.
Yes.
If you don't have a high tunnel,
yes,
you can create a low tunnel and extend your season.
Exactly. So, we're creeping up into if you've got lettuce transplants, like now's the time to get them in the ground for sure. And you can get through into, November, December and still harvest and protect your crop with that row cover. Yeah.
So basically your only limitation is the size of the low tunnel.
Size, thickness of your row cover, that would be a limitation. So if you're going for the overwintering strategy, then you probably want the thickest row cover. If you want, I've got a real cold hardy crop and I'm going to harvest it in just a month, maybe you don't need the thickest row cover. So it kind of depends on what you're growing and what your time frame is and your strategy as far as, am I just trying to get through the winter? I just want to keep this alive until spring. Or am I wanting to harvest, right? That would affect how you set your low tunnel up, kind of row cover you need to use, that kind of thing.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for having us out at the South Farm.
Yeah, anytime.
Appreciated your knowledge with high tunnels and low tunnels, and hope that our Farm School for Women can use this for their benefits.
Yeah, enjoy the farm school.
Hello, my name is Macy Fonz. I'm the horticulture agent for the Mason County Cooperative Extension Service, and today we have Curtis Rosser with us. He's with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in Mason County, and we are going to talk about funding for high tunnels. So Curtis, I've heard that I can go to the local NRCS and they can potentially help with funding, but it's a little bit confusing. How does this process work?
Thank you, Macy, for the time to explain this. First and foremost, if anyone who's interested in just applying in any of the programs with USDA, I would encourage them, first and foremost, they can come and talk to us. Let us make a farm visit. Or the most important thing is they establish a farm number. And then the question comes up, well, I don't really have a farm, I have a few acres. Still yet, visit the USDA FSA office, same place where we're located at, and establish a farm record. And with that process, once you get a farm record, farm and tract number, that allows us to come out and assist you.
So first off, we have to have the farm number.
Yes.
But then is there, what's the process for applying for this high tunnel? What kind of paperwork is involved? What time of year do you apply for these? Is there certain times or is it always qualifying throughout the year?
With USDA programs, contrary to some of the other programs that may exist, cost share programs that are out there, you can apply anytime. So again, we're coming toward the end of a growing season. Now, a lot of producers now are thinking of, well, how can I improve my operation? How can I extend my growing season? And a high tunnel is one of the best ways to extend your growing season. And with that said, and with that foundation established, if you desire to do so, contact us, especially if you already have a farm number, you're already in the system, contact us. You can Google our webpage or just come in and see us there in Washington. We have a local office. I would advise, though, with COVID restrictions the way it is now, the best thing to do is call and make an appointment because we're still not allowing anybody into the office. Now, going back to your question, with USDA, and what you're specifically talking about is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, which we call it the EQIP program, which offers cost share assistance on construction of the greenhouse or the high tunnel. And those terms are interchangeable, but we're specifically talking about high tunnels and not greenhouses. EQIP's is a national program, federally funded, and it's established to improve the natural resources through conservation, water quality, incentives, and things like that. With that said, there are some parameters set aside for historically underserved individuals that can assist with providing you maybe extra incentives about getting funded. And that is, all of that can be, you can see that on the, if you just Google USDA NRCS and look at the programs, you can find all that information there. With that said though, across the board, federally funded, we take your applications are ranked. And we have nothing to do with that. We just, we have the assistant producer and filling out the paperwork. We'll come to the farm, look at the criteria, what's going on out there on the farm, and we'll submit the application for ranking.
So let's say I qualify for a high tunnel. What percentage is covered by cost share or covered by this EQIP?
We used to do it on a percentage, 75, 25% basis. Right now, it's set up on the square footage. We pay a flat rate per square foot of the greenhouse. Last time I checked, it was $2.35 per square foot that they would assist with. Now, if you get funded and you want to go ahead through the process of purchasing your high tunnel, we suggest that you build it, construct it through manufacturer's recommendations. And we'll walk you through the process. There's nothing magical about this or anything like that. The only thing about with the EQIP program is very competitive about being a national program. Very, very competitive. So not everybody, needless to say, gets funded. But don't let that discourage you. Sometimes, in some years, there has in the past where the high tunnels has special emphasis. They're really promoting, trying to get the high tunnels out there on the landscape. Since that time, it's kind of taken a back seat. But again, I wouldn't discourage anybody. If you're interested, come in, talk to us. We'll take the application, or you can do the application online and get it to us, and we'll put you in the system and start working with you. But again, first and foremost, we need that farm number.
Is there anything else we should know about high tunnels as far as funding through NRCS? Anything else that you'd like for our farm school for women to know?
I think it's really great for someone who is in the produce market, who's wanting to grow, who's wanting to do increase their growing capacity. That's the way to go. I think the vegetables that come out of these high tunnels are of better quality. They're not weather beat. You have the ability to control your environment. We put in some watering systems that can harvest the roof water, send it back through the system. I think it's just a win-win situation.
Well, Curtis, thank you for being with us today. And if you have questions about funding for high tunnels, make sure that you visit your local office. And if you're not sure where that is located, you can always search online, or you can call an office that you do know and they can put you in touch. Thank you.
That is the end of our video, and I apologize. I think there was some lagging with the video, but we do have a direct link that we can share with everyone that you can go back and watch if you need to do that. I'm going to see if our specialist, Dr. Rudolph, is on with us.
She is.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about low tunnels or high tunnels? I don't think we have anything in the chat. If anybody does have any questions, you can also put those in the chat, or you can unmute and you can ask your question as our specialist is on with us and can answer any of those that you may have.
I do have a question, and this may have been touched upon. I did get distracted just for a minute. I know when I visited the South Farm, I know that sometimes I see bees in the low tunnels. Is this something that we need to be doing with all of our crops or certain crops?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so you're talking about low tunnels, not high tunnels, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So it kind of, again, I think it depends on time of year and the type of crop. So, and your strategy for your low tunnel. So, I think we talked about this in the video that, some low tunnels are more just for pest exclusion. And so the row cover is very thin and it's meant to simply keep pests out. And this is a common practice for organic growers or people that don't want to apply pesticides, right? And so in the summer, a lot of crops do need pollinator assistance. They're not simply wind pollinated. So all the cucurbits, squash, all that kind of stuff needs actual pollinators to pollinate. So and in that case, you would need to put some sort of bee, usually bumblebees. You can purchase them and put them under the row cover to keep the pests out, but make sure the pollinators can get in, right? In the winter, a lot of our crops don't need pollination, or in the, fall, the shoulder seasons, and then the winter, they don't need as much. They typically don't need pollinators, so you don't have to worry about that. And our low tunnel is usually more for cold protection, not necessarily pest exclusion. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
See, does anybody else have any questions? You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute if you do have a question. And just a reminder that you all do have the kits that you can make a low tunnel. So if you have questions about those, you can ask that as well. And the tunnel, the low tunnel, the calendar that we talked about, you can use that calendar for the low tunnel as well. So we got a question in the chat. It says, I want to grow cold season crops in my low tunnels. I've never done this before. When is too late to start?
I think it's a matter of your, I mentioned this in the video, what's your goal, right? So is your goal for, to be able to harvest in December or November? It really depends on what your ultimate goal is and when you want to harvest and what your market is. If you're thinking of just overwintering something and then, okay, I just want it to survive and then I'll harvest it in the spring, right? Time frame is what I'm talking about, your goal. So everybody's going to eventually want to harvest, right? But what is the time frame? That is going to determine when you need to get things in the ground. So for example, lettuce, right? If I'm going to be selling a product for November, right? My target is Thanksgiving. Then I need to backtrack according to days to maturity, and then add some time in, because those days to maturity are going to be stretched a little bit longer because we're not in that perfect time frame, right? So you need to add, usually we say add about 25% onto the days to maturity to hedge your bets on when things will be ready when you're planting outside of that perfect normal growing season for whatever crop you're aiming for, right? And so the point of these low tunnels, the point of the high tunnels is season extension, right? So you're able to get away with these things, but you also do have to factor in more time because it's colder, because there's less light, right? There is some more calculations involved as far as thinking about when you want to be, when you should get things in the ground. So normally, and I'll give you an example. So normally I think I like to have things in the ground around the middle of September, but my goal is to be harvesting, November, December. I really don't want things to carry over Christmas break, right? This is for research purposes, right? And I have students helping me and that kind of thing. So that's my goal, right? Is September, mid-September, because it's still warm. We can get some growth on things. And my target, right, is, Thanksgiving or just after Thanksgiving, right? And again, it does depend on days to maturity, but usually I loosely, my target is mid-September because it's still going to be warm and I can get some sunlight on there. Yes, lettuce, kale, and greens can grow in the low tunnel. You will need thick row cover to keep it protected. Kale is extremely cold hardy. Broccoli, very cold hardy. Lettuce, it really depends on the variety. So make sure you look at that. But yes, you'll need thick row cover to get away with it. And remember, and I think I mentioned this in the video, is this taking the row cover off when it's warm and sunny, or putting it, making sure to put it back on before it gets cold at night, right? You want to trap some heat in there. So you don't want to wait until 9 o'clock at night to put row cover back on. You want to put the row cover on when it's still, there's still some warmth there. And just to clarify, I am the person that was in the video talking with Macy and Philip. So my name is Rachel Rudolph. I do work for UK. I'm an extension vegetable specialist, and I'm based out of Lexington.
Thanks, Rachel. I forgot to mention that.
No, it's fine. I should have said something before. It's like, my name's on here, but you never know.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any more questions? You can type them in the chat, or you can go on. You can unmute yourself and ask as well.
Hey, Macy, I don't remember if Curtis covered this, but if anybody's interested in going to the conservation office to apply for the high tunnel, you may want to call that local office and make an appointment first, because I'm not 100% sure that every office is open to public just to step in and say hi.
Yeah, and that's due to COVID. After COVID-19 stuff dwindles down, I'm sure they'll open back up, but that's the reasoning behind that.
Sarah, what county are you in? She's asking where the conservation office is. In Bracken County? Hey, David, where is your all's office, the local office there for the NRCS? I think David's on.
It looks like he may have popped off.
Okay. Sarah, we can get David to get back with you. And then we had a question. Let's see. Are caterpillar tunnels considered high tunnels? And I don't believe they are they, Rachel? They're more of a low tunnel. Is that correct?
I would put them in the category of somewhere in between. They're a more temporary than a high tunnel, and they're larger than what I would call a low tunnel. So if you just type in caterpillar tunnels, you'll see kind of what I mean. If you do a Google search, they definitely look more temporary, right? And they're meant to be more temporary, and they don't have to be, but they're not necessarily, there's not as much material involved, and they are meant to be, taken down a lot more than a high tunnel would be. And they're taller. So they would be kind of in the, they call them, some people call them mesotunnels. They're taller than low tunnels, shorter than high tunnels. They're in that in between space. It's a little bit more comfortable to harvest. You know, you're not necessarily crawling around, and you don't necessarily have to remove the covering to get in there to harvest like you would with a low tunnel, right? And a lot of the times the caterpillar tunnels will be covered in plastic, not just row cover. So high tunnels usually have a polyethylene plastic cover. Low tunnels often have, not always, but often have like a more of a fabric-y row cover. And caterpillar tunnels are, again, somewhere in that in-between stage where they're taller than a low tunnel, shorter than a high tunnel, but covered with plastic, but more temporary.
All right, I don't see any more questions. If you have them, you can go ahead and type them in, or you can go on unmute. Rachel, thank you for joining us and helping us make the video. We greatly appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you all. Enjoy the school.
And April, if you have anything you want to share about next week, please go ahead.
All right. Yeah. So thank you, ladies, again for joining us this evening. And like Macy said, we do know that the video was lagging behind a little bit. I was kind of joking with her that it was almost like a foreign film. You could hear the words, but the mouths weren't matching up. So we'll make sure that we definitely get the direct link to that video to you all. That way you can watch it if you want to go back. Other than that, we will be seeing you all next Thursday at 6 p.m. It'll be the same Zoom link, but I will email out a reminder, and we will be talking about forages. So come prepared. We'll be talking and showing you more information about the big long pole that you got in your kits, and the one bag with the UK extension logo on it has the publications for next week, as well as the thermometer and the string. So if you all need anything in the meantime, just let us know. Other than that, you'll be hearing from us with links from tonight's videos, as well as the reminder for next week. So everyone have a good evening. Thank you all, and we appreciate you. Bye.